It is 3 hours before sunrise, and the darkest building in the village is the only one awake. Inside, a single orange eye glows in the blackness. It's a bed of charcoal, breathing under the push of a leather bellows. Every stroke makes the light swell. Every stroke pushes the heat higher. The man standing over it reaches into the fire with a pair of tongs, pulls out a bar of iron, and for 1 second, the entire room turns gold. Then the hammer comes down, and sparks burst outward like a small dying constellation, hissing as they land on the packed dirt floor. Outside the door, 3 people are already waiting. A knight needs a blade made sound again before he rides. A farmer needs his plow iron reshaped before the frost locks up his field. And 200 miles away, a king is preparing for war, and his clerks are writing orders for tens of thousands of horseshoes and arrowheads. All of it runs through this one smoky room. So here is the question worth the next 20 minutes of your life. What if the most valuable business in a medieval kingdom was never the castle on the hill, but the tiny forge at the bottom of the road? Today, you're going to run one. The year is 1300. The place is a village in the English Midlands, maybe 400 people, a church, a mill, and a manor house, where the Lord Steward keeps very careful records. Your father was the village smith. Last winter, he died, and this morning, the forge is yours. Nobody hands you a business plan, so let's build one, from the first day of ownership to the last, and see whether you can actually make a living, or whether the fire eats you alive. Start with what you own, because what you own is strange. The building itself is barely a building. It's a low shed with an open front, a floor of beaten earth, no windows worth the name, and a roof that's deliberately steep so smoke can crawl out. It is worth almost nothing. Now look at the black shape squatting in the middle of the floor, the anvil. That single lump of iron is very likely the most expensive object you will ever own. Anvils were not cast in a mold like a modern one. A smith's anvil was built up by welding masses of wrought iron together under heavy hammers, and then, if you were lucky, faced with a thin layer of steel so it wouldn't dent. It could cost more than a working ox, sometimes more than a small house. Anvils were listed in wills. They were fought over by heirs. They were handed down through 3 or 4 generations, slowly getting smoother and more beautiful with every decade of use. Around it sits the rest of your capital, tongs in a dozen shapes, hammers from small finishing hammers up to a sledge, punches, chisels, a swage block for shaping curves, and the quiet luxury item, files, which had to be cut by hand, tooth by tooth, in hardened steel. A well-stocked forge represented years of savings, which is exactly why you inherited a business instead of starting one. Buying all of it new would swallow several years of a laborer's total earnings, and no bank existed to lend it to you. Here's the first thing to understand about this economy. Historians argue endlessly about converting medieval money into dollars, and honestly, the conversions break down fast because a poor person in 1300 spent most of their income on grain and almost nothing on housing or fuel. So we'll use a better measuring stick. We'll count in days of work. Around 1300, an unskilled laborer in England might earn roughly a penny to a penny and a half for a day's work. A skilled craftsman, you, might earn around 3 pence a day. 12 pence made a shilling, 20 shillings made a pound, and a pound was a fortune, an amount most villagers would never hold in their hands at one time. So when we say a good anvil could cost a pound or more, hear that correctly. It's most of a year's wages for the man swinging the sledge. Now you own the tools. but you don't necessarily own the ground. In many English villages, the smithy sat on land, held from the lord of the manor, and this is where medieval economics gets genuinely alien. In some places, a smith held his cottage and plot under a special condition. He didn't pay ordinary rent. Instead, he owed service. He was required to shoe the lord's horses, repair the manor's ironwork, or supply a set number of plowshares each year, either free or at a fixed price. In effect, the lord got a permanent discount on the most essential craftsmen in the district, and in return, you got land and a guaranteed customer who could not walk away. That's your foundation. Now you have to feed the fire, and this is where most of your money goes. You cannot burn ordinary wood. Wood contains water and impurities, and it won't reliably reach welding temperature. You need charcoal, wood that's been slowly baked in a sealed earth mound until nothing is left but nearly pure carbon. That job belonged to a separate trade entirely. The colliers, who lived out in the woods for weeks at a time, sleeping beside their smouldering mounds because a mound left unwatched could burst into open flame and destroy a month's work in an hour. The math is brutal. It takes several tons of wood to make 1 ton of charcoal, and charcoal is fragile and expensive to haul, so it has to be made close to where it's burned. A busy forge could eat charcoal faster than a nearby woodland could regrow, which is why lords guarded their woods with fierce legal precision. Every basket that reaches your door represents cut trees, weeks of labor, and a cart that survived the road. For most smiths, fuel was not a minor expense. It was the largest single running cost of the business, month after month, forever. Then there's the iron itself. In 1300, iron didn't come from blast furnaces. It came from bloomeries, small clay and stone furnaces where ore and charcoal burned together for hours while someone worked the bellows without stopping. The iron never fully melted. It formed a spongy, glowing mass, called a bloom, shot through with slag, which had to be hammered again and again to squeeze the impurities out. A day's work might yield a bloom weighing less than a car tire. England had real iron districts, the Weald in the southeast, the Forest of Dean in the west, deposits up in Cumbria, and iron also arrived by ship from Spain and the Baltic. But here's the hidden cost that shaped everything. Moving heavy goods overland in 1300 was punishingly expensive. A cart with an ox team covered maybe 12 to 15 miles in a day on roads that were often just mud with ambitions. Bulk cargo could noticeably increase in price over a few dozen miles of land travel, while the same load moved by river or sea for a fraction of that. Geography wasn't background scenery. Geography was your supplier's price list. And steel was rarer still. There was no simple way to make it in quantity. Smiths got steel by carefully carburizing iron in charcoal or by buying small, costly amounts imported from specialist regions. So they hoarded it. Instead of making a whole tool from steel, a good smith would forge the body in cheap wrought iron and weld a thin steel edge onto the working surface. An axe, a chisel, a plow coulter, mostly iron, with a whisper of steel where it actually mattered. That single technique quietly saved medieval Europe an enormous amount of money. So what do you actually make with all this? Let's kill a myth first. You are not making swords. You are almost certainly not making armor. Fine blades and plate armor were the work of highly specialized craftsmen concentrated in a handful of famous centers. Cities in northern Italy and the Rhineland built international reputations on it. A village smith who claimed he could make a knight's sword would have been laughed at. and a knight who bought one would have died of it. What you make is infrastructure. Nails by the hundred. Hinges, latches, locks, chains, cauldrons and pothooks, sickles, scythes, pruning hooks, axe heads, the iron shares and coulters that let a plough cut soil, cart fittings, chisels for the carpenter and the mason, fishhooks, needles, knives, arrowheads, and above all, horseshoes. Horseshoes deserve a moment because they may be the most underrated technology in European history. An unshod hoof wears down on stone and hard road, and a lame animal is a stopped animal. Shoeing let horses work longer, pull heavier, and travel farther on bad ground. That fed the shift from oxen to horses on many farms, which ploughed faster, which meant more land under cultivation. It also carried every mail rider, every merchant convoy, and every army. But horseshoes wear out. A working horse needs its shoes reset or replaced every few weeks, which means your income isn't one big sale. It's a permanent stream of small, unglamorous, unavoidable jobs. Every horse in your district is a subscription. Nails work the same way, and they're stranger than they look. Every single nail was made by hand. Heat the rod, draw the point, cut it off, head it. A skilled smith working fast might turn out a few hundred in a day, and they were sold and recorded by the hundred in estate accounts because they were worth counting. When a manor roofed a barn, someone wrote down the nails. When a castle went up, the clerks recorded thousands upon thousands. Nails were a real tracked expense, in a way that's almost impossible to imagine now when you can buy a box for pocket change. Then there are the wagons, and here's where your leverage becomes obvious. Medieval cart wheels weren't wrapped in a single iron hoop, the way later wheels were. They were usually reinforced with strakes, short curved plates of iron nailed onto the rim, one after another. Strakes came loose. Axles needed iron bearings and pins, and a cart that breaks its wheel on a rutted road is a cart that is now a very expensive fence. When that happens, trade stops. The grain doesn't reach the market. The wool doesn't reach the port. The buyer waits, the price shifts, and everyone loses money until you fix it. That is the real answer to why nearly every village needed a smith. It wasn't for weapons. It was because iron was the one material that could take an edge and take a load, and it was the only material that could not be repaired by the person using it. A farmer could patch his own roof, brew his own ale, mend his own fence. He could not re-steel a plowshare. So how do you get paid? Rarely in cash, and that surprises people. Silver coin was genuinely scarce in the countryside, and the smallest coin was often too valuable for small purchases. People literally cut pennies into halves and quarters. So the medieval village ran on credit. You fixed a man's sickle in June, wrote it in your head or on a tally stick, and settled after harvest when he actually had grain to sell. You took payment in barley, in ale, in a day's labor on your own strip of land, in a share of the wool clip. We know this because it's all over the manor court rolls, page after page of ordinary people suing each other over small debts. The medieval economy was not primitive. It was a complicated web of trust, and you were tangled in the middle of it. Your biggest risk wasn't a competitor. It was a customer who died owing you 4 months of work. You can't do it all alone, so you take an apprentice. In town, apprenticeship was formal, commonly around 7 years, with a contract and often a fee paid up front by the boy's family. In a village, it was looser: a son, a nephew, a neighbor's kid. Either way, the economics match. For the first years, He costs you food, a bed, and endless patience. He pumps the bellows until his shoulders burn. He hauls charcoal. He ruins good iron. And then, somewhere around year 4, something shifts. He can draw a nail cleanly. He can swing the sledge as a striker while you hold and direct the work. 2 hammers instead of 1, which doesn't double your output, it more than doubles it. Because heat is a deadline. Iron only stays workable for seconds. Every reheat costs fuel and time and weakens the metal. A good striker who hits exactly where you point, at exactly the right moment, is the difference between a profitable shop and a struggling one. The cost is written on both your bodies. Burns that never fully heal. Damaged hearing. Eyes scarred by decades of staring into white-hot metal. Backs and shoulders that give out early. Smiths were respected. They held real status in village life, and they show up constantly in surnames and folklore and even legends about supernatural power. But that respect was earned in a body that wore out fast. Now watch a year go by, because your income is anything but steady. Autumn and spring are ploughing seasons, and plough iron wears down against soil and stone with shocking speed. Shares get thin, coulters go dull, and the same farmer is back again and again, because a badly cutting plough costs him more in wasted days than your fee. Early summer brings sickles and scythes to be re-edged before the hay and the grain come in. Market days bring travellers, and travellers bring loose shoes and cracked cart fittings. Winter is quieter, colder, and your best chance to build stock you can sell later. And through all of it, competition doesn't work the way it does today. Your real protection is distance. Iron is heavy and roads are bad, so the smith 6 miles away isn't fighting you for customers so much as serving his own. In towns, the picture flipped. Guilds set standards, controlled who could take apprentices, sometimes fixed prices, and shut out newcomers, protecting quality and members' income while making entry hard. In the countryside, your lord's demands mattered far more than any guild rule. And then, one spring, everything changes. The king goes to war. England around 1300 was fighting in Wales and then Scotland, and armies of that period ran on ironwork in staggering volumes. Not just weapons, horseshoes by the tens of thousands, nails, cart fittings, tools for the men digging and building. When Edward I threw up his great castles in Wales, the ironwork alone consumed the output of many workshops, and smiths were recruited and moved to where the work was. For a forge, this is the boom. Orders arrive in quantities you have never seen. You hire help. You buy iron in bulk. You work through the night, and the glow from your door is the only light in the village at 2 in the morning. But read the fine print, because there's a hook in it. Crown purchasing often ran through purveyance, the right to requisition goods for the king, sometimes at prices below what the open market would pay, and to settle later. Later could mean months. It could mean years. You might be handed a wooden tally as your receipt and told to present it at the exchequer. Meanwhile, you have already paid your charcoal supplier in real coin. That is the paradox of wartime prosperity. Demand explodes, your order book is full, and you can still go broke, because a bulging order book is not the same thing as money in hand. War also pulls fuel and iron toward the army, driving your input costs up exactly when you need the most of them. So let's be honest about the numbers. In a normal year, a village smith was comfortable, not rich. He earned meaningfully more than a laborer, held land, ate better, and had standing in the community, but most of his revenue flowed straight back out into charcoal and iron. Margins in a good year were decent. In a bad year, they vanished. And bad years came. Fire is first. You run an open forge full of flying sparks in a village of thatch and timber, which is exactly why towns push smiths toward the edges and passed rules about roofing. One ember in a dry summer, and you don't just lose your shop, you lose your neighbors' homes, their goodwill, and any future in that village. Injury is second. There's no insurance. A crushed hand ends the business in an afternoon. If your apprentice isn't ready, everything your family owns is suddenly just a shed with expensive metal in it. Then come the shocks nobody can plan for. Between 1315 and 1317, catastrophic rain destroyed harvests across northern Europe. Grain prices soared to terrifying levels, and people starved in enormous numbers. Think about what that does to your business. Nobody buys a new plowshare when they can't buy bread. Your customers can't pay their old debts, so the credit web you're built on tears apart. And you still need to eat, at prices that have multiplied several times over. A few years later, cattle disease swept the herds, killing the oxen that pulled the plows you serviced. Your forge doesn't fail because you did anything wrong. It fails because it rained too much, 3 summers in a row. And then, a generation later, the world turns over completely. The Black Death arrives in England in 1348, and within a couple of years, it kills a huge share of the population. Historians debate the exact figure, but the scale was devastating. Whole villages emptied. Here is the bitter economic twist. For the craftsmen who survived, the disaster was, in cold ledger terms, an opportunity. With so few workers left, labor became scarce, and scarce things get expensive. Wages rose sharply enough that Parliament tried to freeze them by law, which mostly proved that you cannot legislate away supply and demand. A smith, in 1360, lived in a smaller, emptier, sadder England, and often a considerably wealthier one, which brings us back to that dark room before sunrise. We tell the story of the Middle Ages through kings and cathedrals and armies. But a king can't plow a field. A cathedral can't shoe a horse. The knight waiting at your door is only mobile because of the iron under his horse's hooves, and the army marching north eats bread grown by a plow you sharpened, hauled in a cart you repaired, on wheels you strapped with your own hands. Every economy has these people, the ones who don't appear in the chronicles, whose names survive only as a debt in a court roll or a line in a manor account, or as a surname you've heard 1,000 times without ever thinking about where it came from. Smith. Still, today, one of the most common surnames in the English-speaking world. An entire civilization's quiet signature, hammered out one nail at a time. Kingdoms were never built by kings alone. They were built by the people who kept the tools sharp. And if you want to know what really holds a society together, don't look at the castle on the hill. Look for the light that's still burning at 3 in the morning.